The Dilettante by Edith Wharton. It was on an impulse hardly needing the arguments he found himself advancing in its favor that Thursdale, on his way to the club, turned as usual into Mrs. Vervain's street. The as usual was his own qualification of the act, a convenient way of bridging the interval, in days and other sequences, that lay between this visit and the last. It was characteristic of him that he instinctively excluded his call 2 days earlier, with Ruth Gaynor, from the list of his visits to Mrs. Vervain. The special conditions attending it had made it no more like a visit to Mrs. Vervain than an engraved dinner invitation is like a personal letter. Yet it was to talk over his call with Miss Gaynor that he was now returning to the scene of that episode, and it was because Mrs. Vervain could be trusted to handle the talking over as skillfully as the interview itself that at her corner he had felt the dilettante's irresistible craving to take a last look at a work of art that was passing out of his possession. On the whole, he knew no one better fitted to deal with the unexpected than Mrs. Vervain. She excelled in the rare art of taking things for granted, and Thursdale felt a pardonable pride in the thought that she owed her excellence to his training. Early in his career, Thursdale had made the mistake, at the outset of his acquaintance with a lady, of telling her that he loved her and exacting the same avowal in return. The latter part of that episode had been like the long walk back from a picnic, when one has to carry all the crockery one has finished using. It was the last time Thursdale ever allowed himself to be encumbered with the debris of a feast. He thus incidentally learned that the privilege of loving her is one of the least favors that a charming woman can accord, and in seeking to avoid the pitfalls of sentiment, he had developed a science of evasion in which the woman of the moment became a mere implement of the game. He owed a great deal of delicate enjoyment to the cultivation of this art. The perils from which it had been his refuge became naively harmless. Was it possible that he who now took his easy way along the levels had once preferred to gasp on the raw heights of emotion? Youth is a high-colored season, but he had the satisfaction of feeling that he had entered earlier than most into that chiaroscuro of sensation where every half-tone has its value. As a promoter of this pleasure, no one he had known was comparable to Mrs. Vervain. He had taught a good many women not to betray their feelings, but he had never before had such fine material to work in. She had been surprisingly crude when he first knew her, capable of making the most awkward inferences, of plunging through thin ice, of recklessly undressing her emotions. But she had acquired, under the discipline of his reticences and evasions, a skill almost equal to his own, and perhaps more remarkable in that it involved keeping time with any tune he played, and reading at sight some uncommonly difficult passages. It had taken Thursdale 7 years to form this fine talent, but the result justified the effort. At the crucial moment she had been perfect. Her way of greeting Miss Gaynor had made him regret that he had announced his engagement by letter. It was an evasion that confessed the difficulty, a deviation implying an obstacle, where, by common consent, it was agreed to see none. It betrayed, in short, a lack of confidence in the completeness of his method. It had been his pride never to put himself in a position which had to be quitted, as it were, by the back door. But here, as he perceived, the main portals would have opened for him of their own accord. All this, and much more, he read in the finished naturalness with which Mrs. Vervain had met Miss Gaynor. He had never seen a better piece of work. There was no over-eagerness, no suspicious warmth. Above all, and this gave her art the grace of a natural quality, there were none of those damnable implications whereby a woman, in welcoming her friend's betrothed, may keep him on pins and needles while she laps the lady in complacency. So masterly a performance indeed hardly needed the offset of Miss Gaynor's doorstep words. "To be so kind to me! How she must have liked you!" Though he caught himself wishing it lay within the bounds of fitness to transmit them as a final tribute to the one woman he knew who was unfailingly certain to enjoy a good thing. It was perhaps the one drawback to his new situation, that it might develop good things which it would be impossible to hand on to Margaret Vervain. The fact that he had made the mistake of underrating his friend's powers, the consciousness that his writing must have betrayed his distrust of her efficiency, seemed an added reason for turning down her street instead of going on to the club. He would show her that he knew how to value her. He would ask her to achieve with him a feat infinitely rarer and more delicate than the one he had appeared to avoid. Incidentally, he would also dispose of the interval of time before dinner. Ever since he had seen Miss Gaynor off an hour earlier on her return journey to Buffalo, he had been wondering how he should put in the rest of the afternoon. It was absurd how he missed the girl. Yes, that was it. The desire to talk about her was, after all, at the bottom of his impulse to call on Mrs. Vervain. It was absurd, if you like, but it was delightfully rejuvenating. He could recall the time when he had been afraid of being obvious. Now he felt that his return to the primitive emotions might be as restorative as a holiday in the Canadian woods. And it was precisely by the girl's candor, her directness, her lack of complications, that he was taken. The sense that she might say something rash at any moment was positively exhilarating. If she had thrown her arms about him at the station, he would not have given a thought to his crumpled dignity. It surprised Thursdale to find what freshness of heart he brought to the adventure, and though his sense of irony prevented his ascribing his intactness to any conscious purpose, he could but rejoice in the fact that his sentimental economies had left him such a large surplus to draw upon.